A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
You may have been following along the developments around some of the disturbing content of books that are appearing on the shelves of our local libraries. Well, there's been a significant development. The Federal Court of Australia has struck down the Classification Review Board's decision to approve the pedophile fantasy comic called Genderqueer. Well, family advocate Bernard Gaynor has been the spearhead of a campaign around what's on the shelves in our council libraries and our school libraries. He's back with us. Hey, Bernie, welcome back to 2020.
Thank you very much for having me on, Neil.
This is a significant win, isn't it, Bernie?
This is a great win for all decent Australians, Neil. This week, the Federal Court has struck down the decision to approve Genderqueer, which depicts very disturbing imagery of a pedophile fantasy. This book has been on library shelves all over Australia. As a result of this decision, the review board must remake its classification decision, and pending that, Genderqueer must be taken off every library and every shelf in a bookstore pending that decision. So that is a great outcome, and I'm very grateful to the Federal Court for its clear decision, which is a devastating decision as well for those who want this filth on our bookshelves.
Bernard, from what I understand, the Federal Court ruled that the Classification Review Board didn't understand the overwhelming majority of public submissions. Is that possible?
Well, they certainly did not understand those submissions. And one thing that the court case has proven very clearly is that the vast majority of Australians do not want this book in the country. So about 95% of public submissions oppose this book for its depictions of pedophilia. The board labelled those submissions as anti-LGBTQIA+, and then said they gave them little weight. So the Federal Court ruled that they did not understand the public submissions and therefore did not properly consider them. So what this means is that Australians who do get involved in the process to have books classified can have a say, and that the courts will make sure that the bureaucrats actually listen to what they have to say. It's a wonderful decision, and it's something that all Australians should take great comfort in, because it means they can have a say.
Come back to that LGBTQI plus thought you offered, because the Classification Review Board, you're saying, was wrong to describe that those submissions that were given were anti-LGBTQI. What did you mean by that?
Well, they simply said that the submissions against Genderqueer were anti-gay, let's put it that way, and therefore they didn't need to really consider them or give them a proper consideration. That is just wrong. Those submissions had nothing to do with homosexuality or lesbianism or any of the other isms inside the acronym. They were fairly and squarely concerned about the pedophilia depicted inside this book. And so what it means is that the board did not understand the public concern. It also means that this rainbow flag that covers a whole bunch of things cannot allow pedophilia, which is clearly what was allowed in this decision. It's got to go. The board has to go away and remake it, which they should, and they're not going to be able to say next time that this book does not depict pedophilia. It clearly does. In fact, the judge's decision said it was surprising that the board decided that this book did not depict a child. It clearly does. Its own author says that it does, and she drew herself fantasising about a child in a sex act. It's disgusting, and this book should not be allowed in Australia.
And important to, I imagine, just reinforce that idea that not being anti-LGBTQI means that it wouldn't matter if this was a depiction of this sort of sex act between people who were heterosexual. It's irrelevant because it all comes under the same banner that we might think of as being pedophilia.
Absolutely. So the concerns of Australians did not care about the gender of the persons depicted in that imagery. They didn't care that it was two males. They wouldn't care if it was two females. They would not care if it was a woman and a boy or a man and a girl. It's all pedophilia, and it is disgusting and should not be allowed. And it's quite disturbing that rainbow activists have been trying to use, I guess, the cover they have at the moment to try and allow this book in Australia. It's very concerning, and I'm very glad that we won today.
And you're concerned that the federal court found that the decision about not depicting a child engaged in a sex act was surprising. Surprising, is this a significant thing too? Because, you know, this is an unmistakable sex act. They should have been able to recognise that without going through a whole lot of controversy and research.
Well, look, the image depicted a child that was clearly half the size of the adult. It had no pubic hair and no facial hair, that the adult had both beard and pubic hair and was touching this child's genitalia. The board decided that the smaller figure was an adult. It is a crazy decision. It does not fly, would not meet the pub tests, and as the court said, it was surprising that they came to that decision, which sends a very clear message that when the board remakes its decision, it is not going to be able to somehow brush this under the carpet by finding that the child is an adult. And in fact, I say this, Neil, the bureaucrats who approved this book are clearly unable to identify a child in an image of child abuse. And so they're either incompetent and should be sacked, or questions should be asked about the agendas that they're actually pushing, which are very disturbing.
Now, it's important often where costs are awarded when a decision like this is handed down, and costs were awarded against the Minister for Communications. Is that significant?
Oh, that's hugely significant. And obviously there are some legal processes to go through with that. But I think Australians are entitled to ask, how much did the Communications Minister spend defending a pedophile fantasy comic? It's quite disturbing that she spent public money on this. It would be in the tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that is a very disturbing fact. And one other thing that I think Australians should be aware of is that the Minister for Communications right now is running a campaign for misinformation laws which will police our speech. Her bureaucrats have been caught red-handed peddling disinformation about pedophilia in support of the approval of this pedophilia fantasy comic. Australians can have no confidence that these laws will be policed or used appropriately when the same bureaucrats who are going to police our views cannot or will not be truthful about pedophilia.
Well, a lot of people are following along a debate right now around misinformation and disinformation and wondering whether this is a good thing for the protection of people or whether it's going to undermine rights to free speech. But you're saying this is a little bit like, here's a bit of evidence for you as to ways that these things can be abused. Is that the case?
Well, look, I just don't think that you can trust the government to be truthful when their own bureaucrats are clearly unable to see the truth, or they're deliberately hiding the truth. And it's the same bureaucrats, actually, who will police these misinformation laws who are responsible for defending this pedophile fantasy comic. It's very disturbing.
Okay, Bernie, where to from here? Because a big win like this in the federal court, but there are other books that we've discussed of recent times that might well fall into the same sort of category. Is this a move in the right direction for having those things removed from our libraries' bookshelves?
Well, absolutely, Neil. So I received initial legal advice today that the result of this decision is that genderqueer must be taken from every library and every bookstore in Australia pending the new classification decision. So that is a win. It also highlights that there are inappropriate books, illegal books, on the library shelves across Australia. And I'm very glad that over the last 18 months or so, I've been able to convince 14 different councils in Queensland to remove other books that are just very obscene, very pornographic. They should not be on library shelves.
Are there any implications either way for how people might be voting in the upcoming Queensland election? If you're talking about Queensland as a state, it's your home state. Are there implications there for how these decisions are made?
Look, I think that the new Queensland government, whether it's Labor or Liberal, will need to have a look at the way Queensland libraries are stocked because every Attorney General of the states in Australia has the ability to send books through for classification reviews. And I think there is a disturbing lack of oversight at the moment of our libraries. They are clearly putting pornographic material on the shelves, and we've had some wins. And I think this is actually going to increase our momentum, and I look forward to seeing many, many more councils remove the disturbing books on their shelves.
Is it a Minister for Education or a Communications Minister, or whether that's federal or state? Are those the particular ministers that might be responsible for these things?
So there's a few ministers involved. At the state level, I understand it's the Attorney Generals. At the federal level, it's the Communications Minister, but obviously the Education Minister has an input as well because schools fall under her portfolio. And, there are concerns that have been raised in Queensland, and I thank Robbie Catter for this, about whether genderqueer is on school shelves in Queensland at the moment. I have reason to suspect this book is on school shelves, and I hope that the Minister for Education is true to her word a couple of months ago when she said that she'll be checking into this, and I'll certainly be chasing that up. This book must go. It is disturbing that we're talking about a pedophile fantasy comic that is legal in Australia. That is what we're talking about.
No doubt this is a question that listeners all over Australia can be asking their local MPs, but I guess when you have elections coming up, like you do in the ACT and in the state of Queensland, those are the sorts of questions you might like to ask local candidates too. Bernard Gaynor, quickly, what's next for you? This is not the end of your campaign, is it? There are other issues around library books that you're looking at?
Yeah, so Neil, certainly one thing I'll be focused on now is making sure that the implications from this decision are followed through, which is that genderqueer must be removed from shelves. And then obviously there is the reclassification, which I'll be taking a very close part in. But there are many, many other books that we've got rid of. So, yeah, this campaign goes on, Neil, and I thank the many thousands of people across Australia who I've been working with over the last 12 or 18 months. And I encourage people to poke their local councillors in the chest and say, these books in their local libraries are not good enough.
So it's local level, state level and federal level, these implications. To connect with Bernard Gaynor, who's a families advocate, involved in a lot of things and been involved in a lot of campaigns over the years, been dragged before the courts himself so many times. You can connect with Bernard at bernardgaynor.com.au. You can subscribe to his newsletters, keep up to date on the next elements of his campaigns. No doubt an extra friend or two with a donation might be a useful one as well. bernardgaynor.com.au. Bernie, thanks so much for sharing these thoughts with us today on 2020.
Thank you so much, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.